When Pastor Havala asked me earlier this week if I would do the devotional, uh, I of course said yes, obviously. But I started thinking about stories, and I was thinking about um how after church, when the service is over and we're in the gathering space, drinking coffee and eating snacks, uh, one of the big things I really like in that moment is telling stories. I love mingling with the people at the church and hearing their stories, hearing about their upbringing or what's been going on in their lives. I like sharing what's happening in my life. Uh, Even if it's just a moment or two, I really enjoy that time to connect with people. I like hearing about their lives. I like talking about how the church impacts our life and funny things that may happen and have happened and what we're looking forward to and all those things. And I know sometimes it can drive uh, our kids crazy, especially when they were younger, if oh no, dad's telling another story. But I think those are important. And it happens, when we get together, we're coming up on the holidays here pretty soon and we'll get together with families and uh, Thanksgiving especially and share stories again of all those things. We'll tell all those stories of things that we remember from when we were kids and growing up together and things that we did even as adults and trips and all those funny things that maybe Aunt Millie said, that kind of stuff. And I love that stuff. I think it's great. It's what connects us. It's what bonds us when we share those things. I was thinking about that though, and what are those stories? What are the stories we tell about our lives? Uh, Obviously, we talk about the big things, the weddings, the births, somebody passing away. We talk about vacations and careers and hopes and dreams and the ridiculous things we may have done in our past or, well, maybe even recently. Uh, we talk about our upbringing. We talk about our families. We talk about our careers. And I'm thinking, what do we talk about? What do we say about others? Um, Especially if they're different. It's why we talk one way about people we agree with or share similar views with or have similar experiences with us, but if people are significantly different in their political beliefs or their culture or their heritage, we might speak differently of them. And the big one, though, I think, is what is the story you tell yourself about you? What do you say about yourself? What is the story you tell yourself about your faith? How do you see yourself in that story? How do you think God sees you in that story? How do you think God looks upon you? How do you think that story and how you tell it influences how you treat yourself? And how you see that story, that relationship with God, how does that story influence how you treat other people? How does that story influence how you look upon the world? And I think that's a real key question to ask is how do we perceive ourselves? One, and especially how how do we perceive how God sees us? And I think that is a huge component of our faith. That's a cornerstone question. I've been a part of a number of different churches in my life. I grew up Methodist. I was born into a, a family that went to a United Methodist church. I've often joked about that having attended Methodist churches for all the way from birth through my probably middle teenage years, I still don't have the slightest idea what the method in Methodist means. I went to United Church of Christ Church for a few years after that as a young adult. I don't really, back then at least, I couldn't really tell you that it was a whole lot different than the Methodist Church. If I knew the difference in the theology, I couldn't tell you. I came in the Army working with chaplains and got exposed to a huge variety of denominations. Uh, the Samoan Church, I was working with a couple different Lutheran congregations, the African Gospel Congregation, the Jewish Temple, the Nazarenes, Presbyterians, Catholic. Uh, and I know they all have theologies that can vary widely. But to me, the question always comes back to is how do we see ourselves in our faith? I think that's a key question because if we see ourselves as sinners, there's that sense of guilt of, oh, I'm a sinner and yes, I was saved, but I'm still have that underlying sense of, well, thank God somebody saved me because I couldn't do it. But there's still that kind of feeling of maybe I'm not good. I wasn't good. That's the underlying thing there to me. If I see myself as someone in my faith where I have to work hard to earn my salvation, that that can be a challenge too, right? It's I need to be the best I can all the time. And I kind of feel like this is the Santa Claus theology of, you better be good or you're going to get coal in your stocking at Christmas. And that's a perception that I didn't really care for. So how we perceive our relationship with God is very, very important. I lean today, we've all maybe back up a little bit there. We go to the baseball games or football games or something, and you'll see someone with the John 3:16 banner, or we can all probably recite that off the top of our heads. For God so loved the world, he sent his only begotten son. We all know John 3:16, but I'd have to say today, I actually think John 3:17 is more important to me. John 3:17 says, "For God did not send his son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him." God did not send Jesus to the world to condemn the world, but to save the world. When I think of that message, that says to me, God isn't looking at me as, oh, you sinner. Oh, look what you've done now. Oh, look how you may have fallen short. Oh, for whatever reason, you still didn't quite make it. God sent Jesus into the world, and the mission of Jesus, the role of Jesus in that story was to save our relationship with him. Why? Well, it's actually very, we could we could dive deep, deep, deep into that, but the answer to me is actually very, very simple. Because God loves us. We're his. It's that simple. God loves us because we're his. The heart of our faith, as I understand it, is not that you're a sinner. Not that you've fallen short, not that you can't do it on your own, you're undeserving or unworthy or unable or incapable. The heart of our faith, the heart of my faith, and what I think is our faith, the heart is that you are deeply, deeply, deeply loved. It's that simple. You are deeply, deeply, deeply loved. You are. So am I. Anything short of that, to me, is an illusion. It's a falsehood. It's a lie. And I think the hardest cross we might bear, honestly, is to believe that's true. That you are absolutely and deeply loved by the creator of the universe. You are. You are absolutely and deeply loved by the creator of the universe. And that might be hard to hear. When you tell someone that, they might kind of say, oh, but what about that time that I wasn't so nice to my brother? Or what about that time I said mean things to my parents? Or what about the time I stole that candy bar from the grocery store? I'm making that up. I didn't actually steal a candy bar. Um, Not that I can recall, at least. What about the times I really didn't love my neighbor? What about the times I said mean things or did terrible things or just fell short? How could I possibly be deeply loved when I didn't do anything to deserve that? Because you're his. You belong to him and you're his, and he deeply, deeply loves him. Or he loves you. And I think that might be a hard thing to really, really accept. Just think about that for a minute. Let that really get in and say, yeah, you're right. I am deeply, deeply, deeply loved by the creator of the universe, without exception. You didn't have to do anything to earn that. You can't lose it. You're not going to mess it up. It's always going to be there. It's always been there. And you can count on that. You are deeply, deeply, deeply loved by the creator of the universe. But to believe otherwise, what does that look like? Well, I have some quotes I want to read you. And I wrote these down years and years ago. One of them is by the author William Lynch. And he said, behind all the forms of mental illness, there seems to lie a generalized image of the human self as darkly unworthy and no good. It is a deep fantasy and a deep condition that gets into everything we do. That's that falsehood, right? That's that a generalized image as the human self as deeply unworthy, darkly unworthy, and no good. Well, that's just not true. That's not what our faith says, but it kind of gets underneath there sometimes, doesn't it? The author Thomas More, in his book Care of the Soul, said, though it has often been noted that most, if not all, problems brought to therapists are issues of love. It makes sense then that the cure is also love. If I think about that for a minute, of people I've met and myself even over the years, I used to work for a drug and alcohol counseling place in Arizona run by the Salvation Army back in my early 20s, helping people with addiction and drug and alcohol addiction. And so much of that message I heard there from people was that they grew up in a place where they felt unloved and unworthy and used the drugs and alcohol to compensate for that. They were trying to find a way to mask that, to cover it up, or to cope with it. But our faith says just the opposite of that, that you are deeply, deeply loved by the creator of the universe. That can have a tremendous impact on our mental health and the way we live our lives. So, what does that mean? If we truly, truly, truly get to where we really believe that and say, I am deeply loved, and as a consequence, I can love deeply. One of my professors years ago told me, and this resonated strongly with me, hurt people hurt people. I'll say that again slowly. Hurt people hurt people. People that don't feel loved treat people poorly. People that forgive, that feel forgiven, though, forgive others. Excuse me. People that have experienced grace will give grace. And people that feel loved, feel deeply loved, especially, will love deeply. I have another quote from an author named Shannon Martin, and her book is called The Ministry of Ordinary Places. And she says, our vocation is to invest deeply in the lives of those around us, devoted to one another, physically close to each other as we breathe the same air and walk the same blocks. Our purpose is not so mysterious after all. We get to love and be deeply loved right where we're planted by whomever happens to be near. We get to love and be deeply loved right where we're planted. Annie Dillard, who I believe is from this area, the author Annie Dillard, says, we are here to bring to consciousness the beauty and power that are around us and to praise the people who are here with us. When I think of my faith journey today, when I think of my relationship with God, that's what I strive for today. To tell myself that story when I forget sometimes, and it's not that hard to do, but to tell that story of my faith and tell that story to myself that I am deeply, deeply loved by the creator of the universe. And so are you. To look at myself as someone who is deeply loved, and to look at you and to look at anyone else anywhere in the world and see the same. Someone who is deeply, deeply, deeply loved by the creator of the universe.